Hello and welcome to Bible Bytes. My name is Bryn. Over the past few weeks, we've been working through the 10 commandments, and this week we'll be looking at the 10th and final commandment that deals with covetousness, along with its implications. And we'll do that by asking 4 questions of the text. And the first question we have to ask is, what is covetousness? It's not a word we use every day. And to answer that, let's read our passage, Exodus 20, verse 17. It says, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house, you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor." Now the first thing we need to recognize about that is this is a bit different to most of the other commandments, in that it isn't really about something that you do, so much as an attitude of the heart. Right? In that sense, it's very weird to have this as a law on your country's law books, the way Israel did. It's not like Israel had some kind of thought police straight out of a George Orwell novel. Rather, we need to remember that this law is God's law. God is sovereign over every aspect of the people that he created, even our thoughts and our emotions. So when we come to this 10th commandment, we must realize that covetousness is dealing with what's going on inside of us. Right? God is commanding more than just external obedience. That is why I've called this short look at the 10th commandment, don't even think about it. Right? Obedience to God's law isn't just acting a certain way, it's thinking in a certain way. It's being a certain kind of person. So what is this attitude or way of thinking called coveting that God prohibits? Well, at a simple level, the Hebrew word for covet means to desire. And that word is used both positively and negatively in the Bible. It's not always a bad thing. So notice it's not saying all desires are bad. Look at the kinds of things it's talking about. It says, do not covet or desire your neighbor's house, his spouse, his employees, his economic assets such as donkeys or oxen, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. Right? The Bible doesn't say desiring stuff is bad at all times and in every way. God created us with desires. He put us in a good world to enjoy it. We're allowed to enjoy God's creation. Ultimately, he created us to enjoy him, and all those things are just pointers to him. So the problem comes when we desire the wrong things, or we desire things in a way that is wrong. So the first aspect of coveting is desiring what belongs to someone else for ourselves. Right? There's already a commandment that deals with the property of your neighbor. That's the 8th commandment that deals with stealing. But this deals with the heart attitude that lies behind stealing. And it's not inherently bad to want something, to want to get married one day, to want a house, or even a donkey, right? It's not wrong to have aspirations that you work towards. But coveting goes a step further. It says, I want what you have. I want your house or your spouse, right? In fact, it's saying, I wish I had that instead of you having it. That's the first aspect. There's a second aspect to it, and that is discontentment with what God has given you. It's a failure to entrust all your needs to God and instead feeling entitled to the possessions or the lifestyle or the status of other people. It's this heart attitude of feeling God owes me something. We can combine these two aspects of covetousness into a shorter definition, and my working definition is desiring something more than you desire God and at the expense of others. Let's unpack that a little bit by asking the question, why does it matter? I think we can be tempted to read the 10 commandments and imagine this isn't as serious as some of the other things on the list. Surely it's not as bad as murder or stealing or blasphemy. But the thing is, covetousness actually gets to the very heart of God's law. Consider Jesus' words when he was asked about the greatest commandment. He said, we are to love the Lord our God with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love our neighbors as ourselves. Now, you can't claim to love the Lord with everything you've got and everything that you are, when in reality you're unsatisfied with him. You want some more stuff. You want something else, thinking that's going to make you happy. So covetousness makes it impossible to love the Lord your God with all your heart. And what that is actually idolatry. Paul makes that connection in Colossians 3. He says covetousness is idolatry. Right? It's putting your hope in that salary increase or the perfect spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever else it might be. So that's the one aspect. But there's also the fact that when you covet, you fail to love your neighbor as yourself. Right? We're caring less about them and more about their stuff. The owner of the stuff that you love isn't a person who you care about. Rather, they're an obstacle standing between you and the thing that you want. You fail to love people when you covet. So we see this commandment is no lesser than any of the others just because it's an internal matter of the heart. It's actually what God's law is all about. Now, with most of the other commandments, if you read them at a superficial level, we can think, I'm doing fine. I'm not doing any of those things. God should be happy with me. But this last one shows every single one of us up, the good and the bad, the righteous and the unrighteous. We all covet. We're all lawbreakers. Now, even if covetousness wasn't bad enough in and of itself, it is, but even if it wasn't, there's still good reason to take this seriously. And the reason is that covetousness is a fertile soil in which all kinds of evil grows. We see this pattern throughout the Bible and in day-to-day life. Covetousness leads to other worse things. Now, none other than King David is an example of the terrible fruit of a covetous heart. I'm of course referring to the incident with Bathsheba, where David saw a beautiful woman and he wanted to get to know her. He inquired about her. Then word came back, she's married to someone in David's own army, a man named Uriah. Now that should have been the end of it. But David desired her, he coveted her. So he had her brought in, and he slept with a married woman and impregnated her. Now there's a whole botched attempt to try and cover this up, the fact that it's not Uriah's child, and that failed, and so eventually David has Uriah killed. All that because his heart was set on someone who already belonged to another. That is the destructive power of a covetous heart. All David's morality, he's a man after God's own heart, right? Went out the window, all that good behavior, because he desperately longed for something that he shouldn't have longed for. Now, by the way, the things we covet are actually unable to satisfy us anyway. And we see this when God rebukes David in the following chapter. He says to him, I gave you this palace, I gave you many wives, I gave you the whole of Israel and Judah. And then he says these telling words, if all this had been too little, I would have given you even more. Why did you despise the word of the Lord by doing what is evil in his eyes? There is no satisfying a heart that is set on anything other than God. David really wanted for nothing in terms of material wealth and his relationships, but he still wasn't satisfied. He wanted the one thing he knew God wouldn't give him. And that drove him to throw all his morality out the window and take what he wanted. Now, these disproportionate and warped desires we have are not harmless. They drive us to forsake the God we claim to serve and to destroy the lives of the neighbors we're supposed to love. Now we've seen just something of the danger and the seriousness of a covetous heart. Let's consider the question, how do we spot it? How do we recognize covetousness? Now, the thing with covetousness is it's one of those sins that creeps in and poisons almost every facet of our lives. And because it's a matter of the heart, it's very difficult to just point to a particular behavior and say, that's covetousness. Right? It's possible to appear incredibly kind and caring, but inside you're unsatisfied and you want what others have. Still, with that disclaimer in place that ultimately you need to reflect on the state of your own heart, let's think about some possible indicators that you have a covetous heart. Number one, you find it difficult to be genuinely happy for the success of other people. Right? Sure, you feel some sense of happiness, but it's always tinged with a bit of bitterness or envy. Number 2, you don't mind others getting hurt if it benefits you. Right? Sure, you might not actually go and hurt someone, but you're secretly happy when others look bad because it makes you look a bit better. Or maybe you're happy when that person who got selected for the A team ahead of you gets injured because it means you're going to get the call up. Number 3, you're overly concerned with your own possessions. In this scenario, you're not too concerned that other people have more than you do, but you cling to your own stuff and your hope is dependent on them, right? And you cling to them even at the cost of blessing others out of the abundance that God has given you. And finally, number 4, you're quick to find fault with the way your life is, with your possessions, the people in your life. Enough is never enough. You're always prone to wanting the next thing, hoping that will make things better and that you'll be satisfied. These are just a few things that might point to the underlying sin of covetousness. As I say, it's not always something to point to particular behaviors. Rather, it is a warping of our desires and our motivations. It affects every aspect of our relating to God and to other people. Now finally, just as we've seen how pervasive this particular sin is in all of our hearts, that every single one of us is a lawbreaker, let's turn to the last question. What is its remedy? Now the thing about this commandment that we've touched on again and again is it's not actually about what you do. It's about who you are. It's an attitude of the heart. It can't be fixed by changing your behavior. At best, what that'll do is hide the problem from other people. The only remedy to a distorted set of desires, a heart that is set inward on itself, is a new heart. A heart that isn't bent towards you, but is able to love God and love others. And that's precisely what is offered in Jesus. Paul writes that Jesus died so that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. He can purify your heart. He can give you new desires to love God and to love other people as you're actually made to do. Now, if you haven't asked God to forgive you and trusted in Jesus to do just that, there really is no hope. Don't bother trying to change yourself, because sin has corrupted every single one of us. That will just be an exercise in futility. If you recognize that your desires are warped and you want to know how to put your trust in Jesus, please don't leave things here. You're welcome to contact me, talk to another Christian who's wise, who you trust. Ask them what it might look like to put your faith in Jesus, to trust him. But this last bit is specifically for those of us who've already committed to following Christ and who are still struggling with the remnants of a covetous heart. And we want freedom from that self-focus and that idolatry. This bit's for people like me. And the solution the Bible gives is contentment. Have a look at what Paul writes in Philippians 4, verse 12 to 13. He says, I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in any and every situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether living in plenty or in want. I can do all this through him who gives me strength. Contentment is to be happy with God and the provisions he has made in your life, whether you have more than enough or barely enough. So you don't have to look at what your neighbor has, the people around you, and covet what they have. Notice firstly that contentment is something Paul had to learn. Right? It doesn't just happen like that. It takes perseverance, it takes hard work. And secondly, notice that it is only possible through the strength that God himself gives. But what is Paul's secret to contentment? Well, if you read the rest of Philippians, you'll find that it comes from knowing Jesus. Paul considers everything else in his life and anything he might gain as loss for the sake of knowing Christ. Christ is the God who made him, the source of life and every good thing, who made everything in this wonderful creation, and gives good gifts to his children. Seeking contentment in anything other than God is not only sinful, it's actually foolish. We are made by an infinite God to find our fulfillment in him. Nothing else will satisfy us. Not the new job, or the new house, the better paycheck, or the iPad, or the perfect girlfriend or boyfriend or spouse. God alone can satisfy us. I'm going to pray now. And if you have realized that you are chasing things apart from God, who alone can satisfy, and seeking satisfaction in them, and you want to change, you want your heart to be transformed, then I'll invite you to pray this prayer with me. Heavenly Father, it's so easy to want what others have, to envy their seeming lack of troubles, their wealth, their health, their abilities, or their influence. Have mercy on me, a sinner. Help me to see that nothing else compares to the joy and satisfaction that comes from knowing you. Kill my ingratitude, my discontentment and covetousness with thankfulness, joy, and a content heart that you alone can offer. And I ask this in Jesus' name and for your glory. Amen. Well, I want to thank you for joining me this evening. I hope it has been helpful to you. And I want to invite you to join us next week as we start a new series. In the meantime, have a good week. Goodbye and God bless.